Welcome to my solar addiction. Today's video,
Sol-Ark 15K versus EG4 18K PV, Part 2. Who will win the title?
Okay, let's go on. Let's talk about power input. So here is a PV input comparison, and we see the basic stats. It says max allowable PV DC coupled. The Sol-Ark is 19.5 kilowatts. The EG4 18K PV is 21 kilowatts. And he had a problem with that number. He's like, how the hell are we going to get to 21 kilowatts? Well, we're going to show you in a second that we can get close. We might not be able to get there. I wasn't able to find 21K, but I got over 19 several times. Then we have the rating of the voltage range. On the MPPTs, it says 175 to 425 VDC for the Sol-Ark, and then the EG4 is 120 to 500. And that's kind of confusing because later on it says that the DC input voltage range is 150 to 500 on the Sol-Ark and 100 to 600 VDC. And that comes into play when we start trying to have parallel strings on those both 15 amp MPPTs on the EG4 18K PV. You'll see that in a second. So one of the reasons why he could argue that the Sol-Ark could get more PV on it, which is very true, his statement, because of the 3 MPPTs rated at 26 amps each, you could get 2 parallel strings on that inverter on every one of the MPPTs, therefore getting 6 strings versus 4 strings on the EG4 18K PV. So the Sol-Ark could get those actual 6 strings, and the EG4 could only get 4 strings. Maybe? Well, if you got low enough amperage, you might be able to get 2 strings on those 15 amp MPPTs. And I'm going to show you that in a second. The other thing I wanted to point out is the bottom numbers at the bottom. Max AC coupled input for the Sol-Ark is 19.2, and it's 21.6 for the EG4. Max allowable PV power DC coupled for the Sol-Ark is 23.4 and 21 for the 18K PV. But if we add both numbers, max AC coupled input and max allowable PV DC coupled, both of them add up to 42.6. So if you're using both AC coupled and DC coupled, potentially the number could be exactly the same. Okay? So how do we get to 21K? That was a big point he was trying to make. So let's look at that. Depending on your panels, you might get more strings, more panels in a string. So I did the numbers. I went to Sol-Ark's website. They have a sizing tool for panels, and so does EG4. So I used both websites' sizing tools to come up with these numbers. And we can see that sometimes the Sol-Ark gets more, sometimes they get the same, sometimes the EG4 might get more. And that depends on the amperage of the panels. Can you get 2 strings on a 15 amp MPPT? So some of those lower watt panels, which he may not be used to using, he did say it was the panels he was used to when he was thinking of, his calculations. But there are other panels out there, and it's just a matter of finding the one that fits your scenario the best. And sometimes when you have, you need to maximize this, you may need more smaller wattage panels to accommodate the amperage of those MPPTs. This is just max PV for the 18K PV. I just was trying to get to that 21K, which he was really adamant about. The top one, the Apto Solar 450 watt panel with 0 bifacial gain, showed a 19.8 kilowatt input. Now I have an asterisk next to that because once we put in the bifacial gain, we're going to have a problem with having that many panels in a string. So that one's kind of a fugazi. And that's why my point is you got to make sure that you do your math. You can't just, take some guy on a video's word. Don't even take mine. I want you to do the math. Okay? Understand what your MPPT's capabilities are and match that with the right panels to maximize your input. But if we look at the SunPower had several of them that were very friendly with the 15 amp MPPTs. The SunPower 245 watt panel gets the EG4 all the way up to 19.6 on one EG4 18K PV. If you had a Canadian solar monofacial for 540 watts, that one gets us to 19.440. So it's really not as bad as he made it seem. We need to talk about the ease of installation. And I personally find that both of these units install almost exactly the same way. I didn't have a problem with installation on either one of them. And ease of installation is always going to be important if you're going to be doing DIY solar. And doing DIY solar will actually help you save some money and make it more cost effective to achieve your energy independence. But let's kind of look at that 2-aught cable issue, because that was one of his big bugaboos about this whole thing. And he was like, oh, I can't stand putting ferrules. Well, I've never used 2-aught before. I've always used 4-aught. And I get it, man. I always want to over cable, you know, have more capability than is necessary in case there's some unforeseen circumstance. And I understand that. But I don't know if you know who this guy is, but this is Dylan Hillman. He is Sol-Ark's director of training, and he is standing next to a Sol-Ark 15K with double 2-aught. He even mentions it in his training video. So let's take a look at that so you can see it for yourself.
Hi, I'm Dylan Hillman, and I'm the Director of Training here at Sol-Ark.
And we give you 2 sets of inputs on the battery so that you can use 2-aught wire instead of having to get like 350 kcml for 275 amps.
So did you hear that? Let me play it again for you.
Hi, I'm Dylan Hillman, and I'm the Director of Training here at Sol-Ark.
And we give you 2 sets of inputs on the battery so that you can use 2-aught wire instead of having to get like 350 kcml for 275 amps.
So even the guy who is the director of training for Sol-Ark is saying we put in 2 terminal connections for each battery, positive and negative, so that you could use 2-aught. And he made a big deal out of it because he was like, oh, if I had this one job where I had this long battery run. I've watched many of his videos, and almost every time he's using a external bus bar, a battery to external bus bar, and then from the bus bar to multiple inverters. And he could, if you had a long battery run and you were worried about the cost of doing that and you thought 4-aught would be better, you could still do the battery run from the batteries to the bus bar in 4-aught, and then the bus bars are going to be right underneath the inverters, and you could do double 2-aught to the inverter, as in this video from Dylan Hillman at Sol-Ark. So that's really a non-issue that he made a big issue out of.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Not at all.
The reason why Sol-Ark is wanting you to use double 2-aught is because if you look at the manual under D, integrating batteries, the 15K reaches a maximum battery charge discharge of 275 amps if using both sets of battery terminals. If using only one set of battery terminals, the max battery charge discharge will be limited to 160 amps. So to get the full 275 amps out of this thing, you need to have one of these bus bars at the top of the screen for $86.95, and that's on Nas Solar's website. But you need to have that to actually use that 4-aught that he wanted to use for his battery connections. So you got an additional expense, and it's obvious that they wanted both battery terminals to be used. In the video from Sol-Ark, he's using double 2-aught, so you don't have to buy this bus bar. So if you're thinking about that cost, like I said, you still want to do long runs with 4-aught, you can get to those bus bars, the main bus bar. From there, do double 2-aught. I bet the cost of the double 2-aught from the bus bars to the inverter might even be less than this $86.95 for these 2 bus bars that you would need to parallel it to both terminals. So this is the EG4 monitor, and you can see your energy flow. If you have closed loop communication, you can get all of your battery data. which I really like. You could show all the parameters or not. It's really up to you. You've got some nice graphs showing your data over time. This software is really good if you're a data junkie, because there's a lot of different ways for you to actually look at your data, compare your data. Let me fast forward a little bit here so we could see that. You know, we get to the data screen, okay, and it gives you different charts, okay, and then we could actually compare different charts. So if you click on the chart compare, you can start clicking on different ones and seeing their data and how they compare to the other data. So it's really up to you what data you want to compare chart-wise. I know EG4 is working on new software, so I hope we don't lose all of this data comparison features. And then if you want to see your data history, it's incredible how much stuff this shows. So EG4, unlike Sol-Ark, will let you actually load your own firmware when it needs updates. So you would click on the remote update screen, and you would go to each inverter. I have 2 of them, and actually do the firmware updates yourself, so you don't have to wait for somebody at EG4 to do it for you. EG4 also has a production prediction portion of their software. If you look to the right, you could see that it shows, let me give you a close-up of that. Today's yield was 52.2 kilowatt hours, and tomorrow's yield should be 64.2 kilowatt hours. And that's good to know in case you live off the grid and you need to top off your batteries, knowing that you won't get the production you need the next day. You can be prepared for that. You might need to run your generator or charge from the grid. So it's a very cool feature. I'm glad they added that. Sol-Ark does not have that. One of the main things I really like about it, we've got over here, we've got our different working modes. We can do peak shaving, we could do just backup, we can do self-consumption. Makes it real easy to set that stuff up, okay? But one of the main things I really like is on the main screen here. We've got a couple of quick buttons here. We can do a gen quick charge, or we can start a quick charge from the grid. So if I got a storm coming and I know my batteries are kind of low and I'm worried that the power might go out, I could hit that quick charge, and for an hour, it'll actually charge my batteries at a preset wattage, and that is super convenient. So let's look at the Sol-Ark now. So here's the Sol-Ark website, the monitoring system. It does have a nice pretty graphing system at the bottom so you can see your data, and you can turn off each parameter separately. It's got more data points than the EG4, but it does have dark mode, which I hope the EG4's new system will have, new monitoring software will have, and they say they will. I saw James mention that on a forum recently, so I look forward to that. But it's a nice looking software program. It doesn't have the detail options that the EG4 has, doesn't have the quick charge. You can do those things, but it's a lot more steps to make that happen. And for convenience, I kind of like the EG4 software a little bit better. But as far as aesthetics, I think the Sol-Ark looks better. On the subject of the servers, EG4 moved their servers from China. They're now using Amazon servers, just like Sol-Ark is. That is a non-issue. The servers for EG4 are now in the US. They're Amazon servers in California. So one of the points that I wanted to make, the test that he did, the first one was an intentional fail, which I understand. He just wanted to see what it would do, how it would react to a load that it was impossible for it to handle. But the other test was a 13K continuous load. And at first he had PV, no grid. And we see on the spec sheet here that with PV and no grid, for 10 minutes, it could do 14.7. For 5 minutes, it could do 15.5. So 13 was no problem. But then he'd switched off the PV, and it says here on the spec sheet that without PV, it could do 13.5 for 10 minutes. And if you remember, it did the 10 minutes. So it actually lived up to its specs. And then the overheating thing came up again, which to me is a problem of the number one, probably had a first version of the 18K PV with that tends to run a little hotter than version 2. And from this conversation in the comments after his video was published, it seems like he didn't do the firmware updates that he obviously knows is important, because I've seen it on his videos, him waiting for Sol-Ark to actually push through the firmware updates before he cranks up a system for the first time. So it was just, probably in a rush. It was his first time dealing with an 18K PV. I love his videos. I've learned a lot from him. I'm a subscriber to his Practical Preppers email list. This is not meant to be any kind of disrespect. I just wanted to make sure that people had the correct information and make sure that all the facts are straight. The reason why I keep stressing the 12K output is, if you really think about it, that's the only stat that really matters. Because even if you're connected to the grid and could have that extra PV coming in, you're counting on this system when the grid goes down. So you wouldn't have a grid connection, and therefore the added PV that you would get by having that grid connection to go from 12K to 15K would not be there. So remember what you're preparing for, and that's going to determine these numbers. What's going to be the best value? The facts are what they are, and the 12K is what both these inverters are if there is no grid connection. I like both inverters. I think they're both quality. I like good quality equipment. Same thing I tell my firearms student. I'm a firearms instructor registered with the Louisiana State Police, concealed handgun unit for over 15 years. It's got to work. That's what matters to me. Aesthetics, yeah, some things I like the way they look better than others, this, that, and the other. That's a personal opinion. But if it works, it works. And both of these have worked for my house. But if we're just looking at numbers, what matters the most is that they're both 12K inverters. And when you're doing your cost per kilowatt hour, that is very important to consider. So I hope you liked the video. I enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you'd like and subscribe my video, it would help with the algorithm. I'd really appreciate that. It helps with the channel. It helps us get more viewers, and I can bring more of this material to you. So hopefully soon I will be able to get my hands on a FlexBoss 21 so we can show that comparison to the Sol-Ark, which I think is the comparison that needs to be made. But I'd like to have, like I've had with these inverters, some time with a FlexBoss 21. So I'm working on making that happen. Hopefully we can make that happen soon. Hope to see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.
Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed our video.